In 1970, a memo landed on a desk in Detroit. It contained a number, not a name, not a warning. Just a number. The price, in dollars, of a human life. Ford's engineers had calculated exactly how much it would cost to fix a flaw in a new car that could burn people alive in a routine crash. Then they calculated how much it would cost to simply pay the lawsuits instead. The second number was smaller, so they chose the second number. This is the story of the Ford Pinto, a car built under such pressure to beat a deadline that a company decided on paper, in writing, that some of its customers were an acceptable cost of doing business. To understand how this happened, you have to understand the fear driving it. By the early 1970s, small, cheap Japanese cars were flooding into America, and Detroit was terrified of losing the market forever. Ford's president gave an order: build a subcompact car under 2,000 pounds, under $2,000, and do it in 25 months. The industry standard for designing a new car from scratch was 43 months. Ford was attempting to do it in almost half the time. And here is the detail that made everything that followed possible. The tooling for the car's body was already being built before crash testing had even finished. Once the machines that stamp the metal are running, changing the design becomes extraordinarily expensive. The car's shape was locked in before anyone was fully sure it was safe. The flaw was in the fuel tank. To save space and cost, it was mounted behind the rear axle, with only a few inches of crush space between the tank and the bumper. In a rear-end collision, that space would collapse, and bolts from the differential could puncture the tank directly, spraying fuel into the passenger compartment. Ford's own engineers tested this. In crash simulations conducted before the car ever reached a showroom, the tank ruptured in impacts as slow as 20 miles per hour. The company had the data. The car was not yet for sale, and Ford already knew exactly how it could fail. A simple fix existed: a rubber bladder liner inside the tank, or a shield to protect it from the bolts behind it, could have prevented the ruptures. The cost per car was estimated at around $11. Instead, Ford's safety office prepared an internal report that would later become infamous: a cost-benefit analysis. On one side of the ledger, the cost of adding the safety part to every Pinto and every similar vehicle on the road, adding up to over $100 million. On the other side, the projected cost of the deaths, injuries, and vehicle fires the flaw would statistically cause, calculated using a government formula that assigned a dollar value to a human life. That side of the ledger came to less than $50 million. The math said it was cheaper to let people burn, so the $11 part was never installed. The Pinto went on sale in 1971, and the crashes that followed were not abstractions. In one case that would later go to trial, a 13-year-old boy was riding in a Pinto that was rear-ended at an intersection. The car erupted into flame. The driver, his aunt, died from her injuries. The boy survived, but with burns over most of his body, disfigured for life. There were others. Estimates of the total death toll from Pinto fires range into the hundreds, with many more left with severe, disfiguring burns. For years, Ford said nothing about the memo. The company continued selling the car exactly as designed. The truth came out in a courtroom. During the lawsuit brought by that burned teenager, lawyers uncovered Ford's internal cost-benefit memo and entered it into evidence. A jury read, in the company's own words, the exact calculation that had decided a boy's face was not worth $11. The jury did not merely find Ford liable. They awarded punitive damages so severe, over $100 million, later reduced on appeal, specifically to punish the company for the decision itself, not just the defect. It was one of the first times in American history a corporation was punished not for making a mistake, but for knowingly choosing to keep selling a product it understood could kill. Ford recalled millions of Pintos in 1978. The fix, finally installed, was almost exactly the same inexpensive part the memo had rejected years earlier. The Pinto memo did not just end one car's career. It became a permanent fixture in business school ethics courses, cited for decades as the clearest proof that a spreadsheet can be used to justify almost anything, including the value of a human life, if no one in the room is willing to say no. That is the thread running through every file in this channel: the bottle, the dial, the memo. It is almost never a mystery. Somewhere, in a comfortable office, someone runs the numbers and someone signs off. In our next file, we go looking for that signature, the paper trail companies leave behind when they choose profit over people, and the memo that finally proved, beyond any doubt, that they knew all along. The number itself came from a formula. In the early 1970s, federal safety regulators required manufacturers to weigh safety costs against likely outcomes and supplied a table to make that weighing easier. Roughly $200,000 for each fatality, $67,000 for each serious burn injury, $700 for each vehicle that burned. Multiply those figures by the projected count of deaths, injuries, and destroyed cars, and you get one side of the ledger, just under $50 million. Multiply the cost of the part by the number of vehicles that would need it, and you get the other side, over $100 million. The company did not invent this kind of math. The formula was handed to them. Ford's engineers simply filled in the blanks. Not everyone inside the company was comfortable with what the blanks added up to. At least one engineer is reported to have objected, to have questioned whether a formula built for regulatory paperwork should be the thing deciding whether real people lived or died. He was overruled. The car went to market on schedule. What makes this case different from an ordinary product failure isn't the defect itself. Defects happen. What makes it different is the paper trail, the fact that a jury could hold in their hands a document proving the company had run the numbers and knowingly picked the cheaper pile of bodies. That paper trail is the reason this case is still taught in business schools today. Not as a story about cars, but as a warning about what a spreadsheet can be used to justify when nobody in the room is willing to say no. And Ford was not alone for long. In the decades that followed, similar memos would surface elsewhere, in the files of companies that made cigarettes, in the files of companies that made painkillers, each one running its own quiet version of the same arithmetic. The Pinto memo simply got there first, and it got caught first. Subscribe to Cold Ledger, because behind every fortune, there's a ledger, and some of them are written in red.